Thank you very much. In the days of the Beit Midrash, in addition to all of the sacrifices that are described in the Chumash that were brought, there were two practices that were observed specifically on Sukkot, which do not appear explicitly in the Chumash and are only known through the Torah Shebal Peh. Just in between Mincha and Ma'ariv, the rabbi spoke about both. The Arava al Mizbeach used to take a big branch from an Arava tree and have it leaning on the Mizbeach, and the people would go hakofis every day once around the Mizbeach. And on Shana Rabbah they would walk around 7 times around the Mizbeach. It wasn't really a korban, but it had something to do with the Mizbeach. Then there was the practice of Nisach HaMayim, pouring water. In the Chumash, the Torah describes that in conjunction with many of the korbanos, you have to pour wine. Nisach HaYayin, down the pipes, the 2 pipes in the Mizbeach, they used to pour wine. Mizman by Yisrishim, Mizman by Shena, they always poured the wine. The Nisach HaYayin as described in the Chumash. And on Sukkot, in addition to the Nisach HaYayin, in addition to pouring the wine down the pipes on the Mizbeach, they would pour water. So the Gemara tells us, the Mishnayos tell us, and the Gemara tells us that during the period of the second Beit HaMikdash, there were a lot of tzedukim. There was a group of Jews who they wanted to reject the whole Torah, but they knew they wouldn't get away with that. In our generation, you can reject everything. You can just make a reform, conservative reform, whatever you don't please. In the days of the second Beit HaMikdash, they knew they wouldn't get away with that shtick, just to reject the whole Torah. So they said, we're going to reject the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. We're only going to follow the written law, what it says in the Chumash. We're not going to follow the oral law, the Torah Shebal Peh. So there were periods of time where these tzedukim were running the show in the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash, with the tzedukim. And every so often, when the Chachamim would be successful in removing these people from running the show in the Beit HaMikdash, they would institute a yontif. Every month in Donnerstag, they would have a yontif in Eretz Yisrael, in the Beit HaMikdash, in connection with straightening out the korbanos, straightening out all of the issues in the Beit HaMikdash, and a lot of it had to do with succeeding to remove the tzdukim from their position. So the Mishnah describes that once the Kohen on Sukkot was given the water to pour down the pipes on the Mizbeach, and he didn't want to do this, but everybody was watching. So they were very consistent, they were very insistent. There's so much machlekes by the Jews because we believe that the Torah is ben Hashemayim and everything is very dead serious by us. So everybody is very makpid. It has to be, the Chassidim say it has to be dafka like this, and the Snagin hold it has to be dafka like this. Everybody holds it has to be dafka like this. So this Kohen was very insistent. He was very persistent. He's not going to pour the water on the Mizbeach come what may. So instead of pouring the water on the Mizbeach, he poured the water on his feet. He's not allowed to pour water on the Mizbeach. There is no such korban. So the Mishnah describes Rogmu kol ha'om v'es rogeim. The general public, most of the Balabatim were always supporting the rabbis. These tzedukim were like big professors. They were the intelligentsia. But the Hamoinam always followed the rabbis. So the Mishnah describes Rogmu kol ha'om v'es rogeim. All the Balabatim of the Beit HaMikdash were so upset. They threw their esrogim at the Kohen. And the Gemara says they passed the Mizbeach. The din is the Mizbeach has to be a perfect square. And an esrog can't really crack the Mizbeach, was made of cement. But if you throw enough esrogim against the cement Mizbeach, so it's going to chip off part of the Mizbeach. So the Mishnah said, the Gemara describes that day the Mizbeach was nifsal. The Mizbeach was possible. It doesn't say whether it was yontif or was chalamoy. And the Gemara says it couldn't bring any korbanos until they fixed the Mizbeach. If it's on yontif, you're not allowed to fix the Mizbeach on yontif. So they had to wait till chalamoy. It's chalamoy. It's a couple of hours later they fixed it. But for quite a while the Mizbeach was possible. Because the people threw the esrogim at the Kohen, they were so upset why he's not fulfilling the mitzvah of Nisach HaMayim, pouring the water on the Mizbeach. Then the Gemara describes the other practice that they had of putting the Arava next to the Mizbeach also. The tzdukim, it's not written in Chumash, it's only known through the Torah Shebal Peh, it's only known through the oral law. So the Gemara describes the tzdukim were opposed to that also. They tried to block that in any way possible, because they were very insistent. You have to observe the mitzvahs the way they understood it, not in accordance with the way that the Rabbanim said. So on one hand, what could they do? On Chalamoid, they're going to put the Arav on the Mizbeach. There's no way for them to prevent it. They were not running the show at that time. But on Shabbos of Sukkot, so they had a chachma. So the tzdukim knew the Rabbanim would not be metaltal muktzah. They wouldn't move anything that's muktzah, even for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah arava lamizbeach. So the Rabbanim would always chop off this big branch, a fresh branch from an arava tree on Erev Shabbos. Every day they would chop off a branch from an arava tree, put it on the mizbeach. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be Machal Shabbos to chop off a branch from a tree. So they would chop off the branch on Erev Shabbos. So they had this branch prepared on Erev Shabbos, and it was in a container of water to keep it as fresh as possible, because it's no longer attached to the ground. So these chevra, the tzedukim, put stones on top of the container that had that rubber branch in it, knowing that the Rabbanim are not going to remove the stones. The stones are muktzah. So at least for one day they'll prevent them from fulfilling the arava lamizbeach practice. So the Gemara describes, but the Hamoinam, the Balabatim, were all in support of the Rabbanim. The Balabatim were not so knowledgeable in Hilchas Muktzah. They didn't know all the din, so they didn't realize you're not allowed to move the stones off of the arava in order to fulfill the mitzvah of arava lamizbeach. So the Balabatim, who were supporting of the Rabbanim, the Torah Shebal Peh, so they removed all the stones, and then Memela, once they did the Yisra of removing the Muktzah, so the arava from the Mizbeach was available, so the Chachamim fulfilled it. So the Mishnah describes the celebration that they used to have during the days of the Beis HaMikdash over the filling of the water, the Simchas Beis HaShe'eh. They would be up all night celebrating, dancing and singing and juggling, and all the Rabbanim would be participating. The Simcha Mazu was, and what was the whole big Simcha? So the Pashtus is, the Rambam writes a different explanation, but the Pashtus is that this was because of the dispute with the Tzedukim. The Mishnayos tell us in Menachos that when it comes Pesach, when do you start counting Sfira and when the Shavuos fall out? So the Chumash says you start counting Sfira the day after Shabbos, Mimachos HaShabbos. You mean Sfira always starts on a Sunday? And Shavuos is always on a Sunday? It's always an extended weekend? That's what the Tzedukim said, that Moshe, they didn't believe that the Torah was given by the Rebbeinu Shalom. They said Moshe Rabbeinu made up the whole Torah. They didn't believe in Torah min Hashamayim. They said Moshe Rabbeinu was Oiv Yisrael Hoya. He loved the Jewish people. And since Pesach is a whole week, and Sukkot is a whole week, Shavuos is only one day. So how can you take off one day from work? What can you do? So Moshe Rabbeinu was Oiv Yisrael. He loved the Jewish people. So he made Shavuos should always be an extended weekend. Shavuos is always on a Sunday. So we start counting Sfira on a Sunday, Mimachos HaShabbos, and Shavuos is always going to be on a Sunday. So the Chachamim said, not true. We have a tradition. The word Mimachos HaShabbos means first day Chalamoid, Pesach. Yom Tov Pesach is called Shabbos. And the first day Chalamoid, whatever day of the week it happens to be, is when you start counting Sfira, and Shavuos can fall out any day of the week. So the Mishnayos describe the fact that during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, when the Tzedukim were fighting with the Rabbanim, the Tzedukim called the Rabbanim the Prussian, the separatists. The Rabbanim were not the separatists. The Reform were the separatists. The conservatives were the separatists. The Orthodox were always the Orthodox. The Orthodox always do the same thing. The Reform and the conservatives always attack the Orthodox. They're the separatists. They're not separating. The Orthodox are doing what they always did, from all the way back from Sheshes Mebrei, from Maimon HaSinai. And the Reform are the ones who are separating. So the Tzedukim refer to the Rabbanim as the Prussian, the separatists. And the Chachamim, to emphasize that this is our tradition of the Torah Shebal Peh, that the Ksiras Omer, the harvesting of the Seorim, the barley, to bring the Minchas Omer on Pesach, doesn't always occur on Motzei Shabbos. 6 out of 7 times it's not going to occur. It will fall out Friday night, Sunday night, Monday night, any day of the week. Whenever Pesach happens to fall out, we have a set calendar, the 3 days in the week that Pesach can never start. But in the days of the Tanaim, they didn't have that set calendar. Pesach can fall out any day of the week. So whenever they did the Ksiras Omer, the harvesting of the Yom, they made a big fuss about it to emphasize the fact that we follow the Torah Shebal Peh. We do the Ksiras Omer the way the Chachamim said. Then the Mishnah describes that when they would have this public, all the people from all the neighboring communities would gather together. They would announce in advance where they're going to harvest the Omer, where they're going to on Chalamoid Pesach, the first night Chalamoid Pesach. So people would gather from all over, and then the fellow who would be in charge would call out 3 times. Every time he would ask a question. Should I harvest it tonight? And everybody would scream out, yes. Should I harvest it tonight? And should I harvest it even though today is Shabbos? Yes, it will be on Friday night. Yes, even though it's Shabbos, you should do it. He would repeat everything 3 times to emphasize the fact that we subscribe to the Torah Shebal Peh. We have such a practice described in Shulchan Aruch. When a person takes a neder is binding. A person takes a neder is binding. The Chumash gives us a loophole. If a young girl takes a neder till the age of 12 and a half, the father has the ability to be made for the neder under certain circumstances. Certain nedarim, yes, and most nedarim, no. And when a married woman takes a neder, so there are some of the nedarim, most of the nedarim the husband does not have the right to be made for. On rare occasions, special occasions, the husband has the right to be made for the nedarim of his wife, and the father has the right to be made for the nedarim of his daughter. But HaTorah, when you go to a Bezdin, the Bezdin declares Muta HaNeder. The person says, if I would have realized how uncomfortable it's going to be to live up to this neder, I would never have taken the neder in the first place. And the Bezdin declares that the neder is neder b'toyas, and therefore was never binding from the very outset. This is not described in the Chumash. This is only known through the Torah Shabbat Peh, so the oral tradition. And the Mishnah, the last line in the first parak in Chagiga says, Het nedarim parchim bo avir. This institution of Hataras Nedarim was transmitted orally from generation to generation. There isn't even a drasha in the Chumash to read in between the lines. Sometimes you have Torah Shabbat Peh where you darshan. The Chumash switches from masculine to feminine, from singular to plural. You have a word spelled with an extra vav, missing a vav, with a yud, without a yud. You have Midrash HaTorah Nedrashes, and you have ways how to read, ways and means how to read in between the lines to fill in all the missing information, all the details. Then you give him mitzvah. So the Mishnah in the end, the last line in the first parak of Chagiga says, HaTorah's Nedarim, the institution that we have, that you go to a Bezdin, and you tell a Bezdin, if what you tell him is true, if what you tell him is not true, so the whole HaTorah is not valid. If what you tell him is true, then you say, if I would have realized how much sorrows I'm going to have, how much aggravation, how difficult it's going to be to observe this neder, I would have never taken the neder in the first place. So then the Bezdin has a right to declare that this is a neder tois. So this is not described in Chumash at all. This is only known through the Torah Shabbat Peh. And the Tzdukim again never believed in that. And the Karoim never believed in that. They had in the days of the Gaonim, in the days of the Rambam, you had Karaites who followed in the ways of the Tzdukim of the times of the Bayesheni, who didn't accept the Torah Shabbat Peh. So they never recognized HaTorah's Nedarim. So that's why it says in Shulchan Aruch that the minig is, when you do a HaTorah's Nedarim, so the Bezdin says 3 times, mutalach, mutalach, mutalach. What does it say 3 times? Say 1 time, mutalach. You want to emphasize, just like the Mishnah in Menachos says, when they did the Ksira Soima, when they would harvest the Mincha Soima on Chalamoid, first night Chalamoid Pesach, and it wouldn't be Motzei Shabbos. So on each step of the way, the Kohen who would be in charge would say 3 times, should I put it in this basket? Are you sure I should harvest it tonight? Or should I use this sickle? And tonight it's not Motzei Shabbos. Everything he would say 3 times for emphasis, to emphasize the fact that we subscribe to the Torah Shabbat Peh. So it says in Yeridea that that's the minig, that when we make a Torah Shabbat, we say 3 times mutalach, mutalach, mutalach. We have a funny practice that's probably a mistake, that on Erev Rosh Hashanah, when we do HaTorah Shabbat, we say 9 times. We say mutalach, 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 then you say again another 2 times. So what do you have to say 9 times? If you look, you say it once, you already said 3 times mutalach. So that's what some of the Gedolim point out. That's a mistake. Saying 9 times, that's a mistake. But to say 3 times, that says in Shulchan Aruch, the minig is to say 3 times to emphasize the fact that we subscribe to the Torah Shabbat Peh. In fact, it's a big question why we introduce Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre. For many generations, Kol Nidre was always assumed to be a HaTorah's Nedarim. We make a declaration that all of the Nedarim that we took from last Yom Kippurim, Shabbat, Yom Kippurim, Hazrat, Elis, Yom Kippur, were matter all of the Nedarim. There was Rashi's grandson, the Rabbeinu Tam, together with his father, changed the text of the Kol Nidre, and instead of serving as a HaTorah's Nedarim for the Nedarim that were taken in the course of the past year, they changed the Nusach, and that's the Nusach that we say also. It's a declaration in advance. And in the Nedarim will take the Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippurim Haba Leim of the Torah, and in the Nedarim will take in the course of the upcoming year, till Ibrayar, till next Yom Kippur, should be null and void. It's a declaration in advance. But for many generations, it was assumed that Kol Nidre is a HaTorah's Nedarim. So this is a big problem. Why do we introduce, the way the Rabbeinu Tam said also, why do we introduce Yom Kippur with a HaTorah's Nedarim? What is that all about? So I remember reading an essay by some German professor, a Jewish German professor, I forgot the name, from 150 years ago. And he has a fantastic Maramakim. He documents the fact that in Alexandria for years, in Egypt, they would have a parade, like Lubavitch has a parade on Lag Baimer. Like Boimer is the Yontif of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It has something to do with the Zohar, with Kabbalah. So Lubavitch celebrates a big parade in New York City on Lag Boimer. So in Alexandria in Egypt, for many, many years, they would have a parade on Yom Kippur. They must have had a hapsokah. I guess they didn't say as much piyutim as we had. So some shuls is not hapsokah. So they had hapsokah. They had a parade supporting the Torah Shebal Peh. They had a parade because they had karoim, and they were fighting against the karoim. So all of those who were Orthodox, who did subscribe to the Torah Shebal Peh, would march in the parade. So this professor, whose name I never registered in the first place because I never heard of this professor to begin with, but an interesting argument, he suggested that maybe Kol Nidre was introduced at that time because the karoim never believed in Hataras Nadar. Because Hataras Nadar, according to the Mishnah, is pure Torah Shebal Peh. Parchim Bo'avir is just transmitted orally from generation to generation, floating in the air. The way the Mishnah holds, there isn't even a source to read it in between the lines. The Gemara quotes other Tanaim who disagree and say there is a drasha. It's for the Midrash Hatar and the Drashas, but the Mishnah holds there's no drasha for Hataras Nadar. So this was the suggestion that was made. Maybe Yom Kippur is introduced with Kol Nidre because to emphasize the fact that we subscribe to the Torah Shebal Peh. So the thing that's most Torah Shebal Peh that we know of is Hataras Nadar. Mamish Eilehem HaMeshi Yismochu. And they used to have this parade. And many Gedolim claim, the Beis HaLevi has a whole essay about this, that we celebrate Kabbalah Satorah 2 days in the year. On Shavuos, we celebrate the fact that we were given the Torah Shebichsav. And on Yom Kippurim, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down the second time with the second set of the Luchas, we celebrate the fact we were given a Torah Shebal Peh. So that's why they chose Yom Kippur as the day to have the big parade to support the Chacham, to support the Orthodox practice. We subscribe to the Torah Shebal Peh, and maybe that's why they introduced the day of Yom Kippur with the Hataras Nadar, which is a chunk of pure Torah Shebal Peh. On Sukkot, they had the practice. They made this big hullabaloo. They had the big celebration of the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva in connection with drawing up the water, pouring the water on the Mizbech. There would be hulyan. They would be celebrating all night. The Gemara says they hardly slept. They just dozed off a little bit. They would still be celebrating 7 days straight, 24 hours a day, all day and all night. They would be celebrating to emphasize the fact that we subscribe to this chunk of Torah Shebal Peh, to the Nisach HaMayim. What exactly is the source of this institution of the Nisach HaMayim? So the Gemara quotes 3 different opinions among the Tanoim. One Tana is of the opinion that it's purely Halacha Moshe Sinai, means it's an oral tradition and there's no drasha, there's no way to read it in between the lines. The other 2 Tanoim disagree. They say, no, it's not Halacha Moshe Sinai. There is a way to read it. If you know how to darshan the psukim, there is a way. So one Tana is of the opinion that if you look in the psukim, every morning of Chalamoid we learn the parsha from Parshas Pinchas. About this karbonis, the number of karbonis changed every day. The first day of Sukkot, he brought 13 par. Second day, the parah Chagam is Matam Ahochim. Second day, 12, and so on. So the exact same karbonis are repeated every day with the change. Instead of 13, it's 12, and 11, and 10. It goes down every day, one less par. But there's a slight shinui in the lashon from one day to the other. So on the second day of Sukkot, the pasuk says, "V'niskehem." It says all of these musafim are over and above the Tamid Shal Schachter, the Tamid Shal Bein Habayim, Alolas HaTamid, and it says V'niskehem. It should have said V'niskot. Olas HaTamid is feminine in singular. Ola doesn't say Olos. Olas HaTamid. It should say V'niskot. So instead of V'niskot, it says V'niskehem. So there's an extra mem. Then the Gemara points out that on the 6th day of Sukkot, today was the 6th day of Sukkot, so it says Unisocheho, should have said V'niskot. Olas HaTamid V'niskot. And on Hoshana Rabbah's Kriya, B'Yom HaShvi, Hoshana Rabbah says Kamishpatam. Should have said Kamishpat. Every other day it says Kamishpat. You bring all the karbonis according to the rules and regulations that are written in Parshas Vayikra and Tzav, how to bring karbonis. All of a sudden over here it says Kamishpatam instead of Kamishpat. So one Tana says, this is a Midrash Hatar and Drashas man. If you would have asked me, I would have said that this is a Balatur. This is a Chassidische verbal. So the Tanaim say no. The Tana says this is a legitimate Drasha. Like, how do you know that you need 3 hadasim? The Gemara the Mishnah has a machlokas hatarim. Do you really need 3 hadasim, or is 1 hadas good enough? Chasidim Anshe Maisa, the Rambam says they have many more. It's a hiddur mitzvah to have more. Some Chasidim have, what do they have? They have 69 hadasim. Hadas b'gematria is 69. So some have 69 Hadassah. Okay, you gotta have a big fist to hold so many Hadassah. You gotta have some Marabas also with a lulav too. So there's nothing wrong with having extra Hadassah. The Rambam says it's not a violation of Baal Tosef. But what's the minimum? What's the bare minimum? So the Mishnah has a machlekes whether you need a minimum of 3, a minimum of 1. There's a Ramban on Chumash writes that you have to have 3 Hadassim and 2 Aravas, 1 lulav and 1 esrog adds up to 7, and this has something to do with the 7 spheres. So Rav Soloveitchik pointed out, very interesting, that in the Kabbalah literature, they consider Rabbi Akiva a crucial figure in Kabbalah. Rabbi Akiva is the one who says in the Mishnah 1 Hadas and 1 Arava. He doesn't hold from the 7. Different Kabbalah, okay, different idea of Kabbalah, but he doesn't hold from this Kabbalah that the Ramban writes on Chumash, that the 3 and 2, 1 and 1 is 7, corresponding to the 7 spheres. Rabbi Akiva apparently does not agree with this. So what is the source of our practice that we have 3 Hadassah? Gush says, Anaf 8 Tzavos, Anaf is singular. Why do you say you need 3? So the Tana who insists that you need 3 says, because it says 3 words, Anaf 8 Tzavos. Again, if you would have asked me, I would have said, it's a Balatur, or Sidish Rebbe, gesagt, Sidish Rebbe. But the Tana says, no, this is a Midrash Hatar Nidreshes man. The Gemara has those who remember in Sanhedrin, the beginning of Sanhedrin, the Gemara has, how do you know how many zrikas of the korban chatas you have to do? There are 4 corners on the Mizbech. How do you know how many zrikas you have to do? So the Gemara adds up, how many times does it say karnas, karnas, karnos? How many defanas do you need in a sukkah? A whole discussion, the beginning of Masechah Sukkah. So the Gemara says, it says basukas, basukas, basukos. You're adding up how many times the word appears in Chumash. We're not used to thinking in these terms. But this, the Tanoim held, this is a midah shatar and Reshus. This is a way to derive it in by reading in between the lines. So here also, one Tana is of the opinion, we don't pass them like this time. One Tana is of the opinion that you have mem yud mem, that the mem, the 2nd day Sukkot it says minis kehem, you have an extra mem. On the 6th day of Sukkot it says unis socheho, an extra yud, and on the 7th day, Hoshana Rabbah, it says, Kemishpatam, you have the mem. How do I know we don't pass like that? Because the Gemara says, Arkasha, the Gemara says when you write a Sefer Torah, you have to be careful to write all of the tsuras ha'osios properly. Aleph base has to be written properly. So we know that there are 5 letters, mem, nun, tzadik, pei, chof, that have, if it's in the middle of the word, the mem is written one way, so at the end of the word, it's a shlos mem. It's written as a square. So the Gemara says, Masechah Shabbos, you have to have ksiva tam. When you write Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzahs, you have to write every letter correctly. So if you wrote an open mem at the end of the word, or a closed mem in the middle of the word, the whole Sefer Torah is possible, the whole Tefillin is possible. Because it says, Saftom, Ksiva Tam. Saftom al Mezuzahs will be darshan Ksiva Tam. So the Gemara says, so how can this Tana darshan over here, mem yud mem? V'nis kehem is a final mem. A final mem is supposed to be an open mem. So the Gemara says, that Tana disagrees. Yeah, but we paskin the Sefer Torah is no good. So obviously we don't accept this Tana. This Tana is not an asmachta. This Tana holds this is the drasha. And if you write a Sefer Torah with, you put a closed mem instead of an open mem instead of a closed mem, but yeah, everything would be good. It's just l'chatzit. And we don't paskin like that. We paskin if you put a closed mem instead of an open mem, the Sefer Torah is possible. So that's why the Gemara says we don't accept that opinion of that Tana. The Gemara says also, we're going to bench Geshem on Shmini Atzeres. You look in the Mishnah, it's the first Mishnah in Tainis, it's a machlekes hatanai. So we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua had many disagreements with Reb Lezer. Most of the time, Reb Lezer was from the school of Beit Shammai, Reb Lezer Shamutihu, and usually we don't accept his opinion. Most of the time we don't pass like Beit Shammai, most of the time we don't pass like Reb Lezer because Reb Lezer was from the Beit Shammai. So here also, Reb Lezer is of the opinion that you bench Geshem earlier. You don't bench Geshem on the last day of Sukkot, bench Geshem earlier. Why? So the Gemara says 2 versions of what Reb Lezer is based on. Maybe you bench Geshem in conjunction with the Nisach HaMayim. So the Gemara says, so when exactly did they do Nisach HaMayim? So in the Mishnayos and Sukkot, it's a dispute among the Tanoim. The Tanaim who are arguing didn't live Bisman Ba'ishen. So none of them saw the Beis HaMikdash. It's a historical machlekes. One is right and one is wrong. You can't say Ela Diela Dibba Kim Chaim over here. None of these Tanaim lived in the days of the Beis HaMikdash. They're talking about historical tradition. So it's unclear. So the Mishnah says one Tana is of the opinion, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that they did Nisach HaMayim all 8 days, including Shmini Atzeres. And most of the Tanaim say no, they only did Nisach HaMayim 7 days. Then you look in the first daf in Tainus, the Gemara says, but there are other Tanaim. This Tana who says Mem Yud Mem, the famous Drasha Mem Yud Mem, he holds that you only start Nisach HaMayim on the second day of Sukkot. And the Tana who says in the Sacheho, from the sixth day, holds you only do Nisach HaMayim on the sixth day and the seventh day. You don't do 7 days, you don't do 8 days. You start on the sixth day. So there's a major difference. So we don't follow either of these opinions. We don't follow the Mem Yud Mem. We don't follow Una Sacheho either, because if it would be Una Sacheho, the Gemara says he wouldn't do Nisach HaMayim the first 5 days of Sukkot. He'd only do the 6th and the 7th days of Sukkot. So the Gemara has these three opinions. What is the source? We assume that this is a real biblical din. What is the source? At one time was of the opinion the source of the practice of Nisach HaMayim is the Mem Yud Mem. The Gemara said, Masech Shabbos, we don't paskin like that time, because we paskin, the writer said, with a closed mem instead of an open mem is possible. The other time says the source of Nisach HaMayim is in the Sacheho. We don't paskin like him either, according to him. So you only do Nisach HaMayim on the 6th day and the 7th day. We don't paskin like that. We assume Nisach HaMayim is done all 7 days. Not 8 days, 7 days. That's what we assume. So what is the source of the Nisach HaMayim? We assume it's Halacha L'Moshe Messina. Halacha L'Moshe Messina means that an oral tradition of the Torah Shabbat Peh has absolutely no marker whatsoever. You can have it on Schachter, but you don't have any Midrash or Torah MiTzion, and you have no way to read in between the lines of the Chumash to establish this din. The Rambam, in his commentary on the Mishnayos, in the end of Zvachim, has a very fascinating interpretation of the Gemara. There is a din of Shchut Echutz. You're only allowed to shech karbanis in the Beit Midrash. Let's say somebody will decide to put up a mizbeach, a bama here in Toronto, and start bringing karbanis, and that's against the halacha. You're not allowed to bring karbanis outside of the Beit Midrash. And if one does, the pasuk says in Chumash that there's a punishment of kores, and if a person violated that there b'shegig, he would have to bring a korban chatas when the Beit Midrash will be built. So the psukim in Chumash, in Parshas Zichron DOV, you have 2 parshias. You have a parsha of Shochet Bachutz and Malabachutz. One who shechts a korban outside of the Beit Midrash is an avera, serious avera for which the punishment is kores. One is Malabachutz. One person shechts the korban, he did an avera, and I'm going to take the chelak, the fat of the korban, and burn it on the mizbech. That's a separate parsha. That's Malabachutz, and that's the name of the parak in the end of Zvachim. Hashochet v'hamala. One of those shchita on a korban outside the Beit Midrash is an avera. One of those Malabachutz is also an avera. So what happens if a person does Nisach HaYayin outside of the Beit Midrash? You build a boma here in Toronto, and someone's going to take a bottle of wine and be magdish it. This is Yayin, and that's going to pour it down. He'll drill holes, he'll have pipes in the mizbech, and he'll pour the wine. So that's a malabachut. It's also a korban. Not only if you burn the fat of the korban on the mizbech, is that an avera of malabachut? If you pour wine, Nisach HaYayin outside of the Beit Midrash, is also an avera of malabachut. So what if a person pours water on Sukkot? Some wise guy will build a boma here in Toronto, and someone will take some water, a bottle of water, and he'll be magdish it. This is the mayim for Nisach HaMayim. He's going to pour it on the mizbech. Will that be an avera of malabachutz or not? Means if he'll do it b'shegig, will he have to bring a korban chatas or not? So the Mishnah has a machlekes hatana. So the Gemara says, in Vos Bashteta machlekes, what's the nekuda, what's the issue that they're debating? So it's a little unclear what the Gemara answers. So the Rambam interprets Tosfos on the Gemara, does not read the Gemara like this, but the Rambam reads the Gemara as follows. If you should assume that the whole institution of Nisach HaMayim is purely halacha l'Moshe Missinai, then the whole korban only exists as a halacha l'Moshe Missinai, so you don't have any einish on halacha l'Moshe Missinai. So there wouldn't be any punishment of kores for someone who would be pouring water outside the Beit Midrash. But if it's based on Midrash Torah MiTzion, if it's based on Mem Yud Mem, or it's based on an Sacheho, you're reading it in between the lines, then that's part of Torah Shabbat Peh. It's not Torah Shabbat Tzav, it's Torah Shabbat Peh, but it's not Allah Moshe Messina. So then that you can have an einish. That's fascinating, that's famous. The Rishonim of Masech Shabbos say like that you don't give any onshim on halacha Moshe Messina. So here the Rambam claims that that's what it says in the Gemara. The Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnah is the end of Zvachim interprets that that's what the Gemara said. That if one should assume the way we assume, that the institution of Nisach HaMayim that was practiced in the days of the Beit Midrash was purely halacha Moshe Messina, it's not based on Midrash Torah MiTzion, so then there wouldn't be any kores. Someone would be malabachut, someone would be menasach, me'achad v'chad. Outside of the Beit Midrash, there wouldn't be any punishment. It's very interesting. There is a Mishnah at the end of Brachas, the last parak in Brachas. The Mishnah says that in the Beis HaMikdash, whenever the people would recite any bracha, they wouldn't just say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Sha'akalni b'dvara, whatever. They say, Baruch atah Hashem, Magen Abraham, and Yadav and Shmones. In the Beis HaMikdash, whenever they would say a bracha, they would say, Min ha'olam v'yad ha'olam. It's a practice they had. So the Mishnah describes this was a change. Mishikilkalu haminim, sometime during the period of the second Beis HaMikdash, the minim of the apikursim, the people who didn't believe in Olam Haba, the only Olam Hazeh you don't have to believe in. We're all living in Olam Hazeh, that you don't have to believe in. Olam Haba, we don't see it. So that's a question of Emunah. Do you believe in Olam Haba? So Mishikilkalu haminim, when the apikursim started to dance, and they didn't believe in Olam Haba, his kino, the Chachamim introduced that in the Beis HaMikdash, whenever a person says a bracha, should always say the Rebbeinu Shalom is the Melech HaOlam, Min HaOlam Yad HaOlam, Ba'olam Hazeh, Ba'olam Haba. When was that Mishikilkalu haminim? At what point during the period? It sounds like this in the Bais Sheni. At what point did that occur? So the commentaries on the Mishnayos point out that was from day number 1 of the Bais Sheni. They point out from Tanakh. That was day number 1. Apparently the whole Bais Sheni was riddled with apikursis from the beginning to the end. Bais Sheni, Bais Rishon lasted for 410 years. Bais Sheni lasted significantly longer. The Gemara said Bais Sheni lasted 420 years. And the history books say it lasted significantly longer than that. So the whole period of the Bais Sheni was riddled with apikursim from the beginning to the end. It's interesting. In the last parak in Sanhedrin, parak Chelik, it says, Kol Yisrael yesh lo chelik Olam Haba. All the Jewish people are going to go to Olam Haba, except if a person is such a terrible Baal Aveira, he's awful, then he doesn't have a chelik in Olam Haba. Whoever did an Aveira, so one will be punished in Gehenna a little bit, then sure, punished, and then you go to Olam Haba. Some people are just lost their Olam Haba. So the Mishnah says there are 3 biblical figures, there are 3 kings. And 4 hadyotis, 4 biblical figures who were not kings, and 3 who were kings, who are not going to have Olam Haba. And one of the 3 kings is Menashe, a Jewish king. And the other Tana disagrees. No, Menashe did Shuvah at the end. Machlokes HaTana. So the Gemara tells a story there in the last parak in Sanhedrin. Rav Ashi was the time at the end of he was one of the editors of Talmud Bavli. Rabbeinu Rav Ashi was giving a shir Mishnayos to the students. So he finished the first 9 parakim in Sanhedrin. And he said, tomorrow morning I will continue the shir. I will speak about our dear buddies, Menashe and his friends who didn't get Olam Haba. Okay, he's joking, being facetious. I'll speak about our chaver, our buddies, Menashe and the others. So that night he had a dream. Menashe appears to him in his dream. So he says, my dear Rav Ashi, I'll ask you a shayla. When you say Hamoitzi, when you ever say a bracha, you're supposed to eat. The first piece of food should be the most delicious piece. If you have, let's say, you plan to eat grapes and apples, and grapes is from the Shivas Haminim, so say bar prihoitz and the grapes and eat the apples later. Don't say bar prihoitz and the apples and eat the grapes later. Whenever you say a bracha, you should say the first thing you eat should be adav chashav. So he asked him, when you say Hamoitzi, which part of the bread should you eat first? So in his dream, Rav Ashi tells Menashe, I don't know, why there's a din about that too. So he says, of course there's a din about that. You have to eat the crust first. The Gemara doesn't say whether the top crust or the bottom crust. So that's a machlokes in Shulchan Aruch. So they say when you say Hamoitzi, you should fold over the bread and bite the top and the bottom crust at the same time. Because we're not sure which crust Menashe was talking about. So Menashe says, you have some chutzpah. You're kidding about me. You're going to give the shir tomorrow about our buddies. I'm your buddy. I can put you in my little pinky. I know how to learn much better than you. So Rav Ashi asks him in his dreams, how come you worship Avodah Zarah? What was the matter with you? If you're so learned, so he says, you don't understand. If you would have lived at that time, you would have picked up your kapata. You would have run also to worship Avodah Zarah. There was such an urge. There was such a yetzer hara. People have yetzer hara for money, for food, for all kinds of things, all kinds of nasty yetzer haras people have. Today, hardly anybody has a yetzer hara for Avodah Zarah. There are people, there are Jews, unfortunately, that people of Eretz Yisrael go to India, they worship Avodah Zarah. We don't understand. The normal people don't understand. It looks to us like they're mamish mishugai. But in the days of the Tanakh, that's what Menashe told Rav Ashi. There was a tremendous drive to run to worship Avodah Zarah. It was l'teyaven. They would pick up their kapot and they would run to worship Avodah Zarah. So where did it disappear? So the Gemara explains, in the Treyosa we have the Nevuos of Zechariah. So Rashi writes in his commentary on Zechariah, on the Tanakh, the prophecies of the Navi Zechariah are the most obscure. If you don't have a tradition of the Torah Shebaal Peh, you don't understand one word what the Zechariah is talking about, what the allusions are. Flying horses and Hadass, and it's wild stuff. No one knows what's going on. So there is a tradition. We have traditions about everything. So there's a parsha in Zechariah where he describes they had a metal container and there was a woman, I don't know why it's a woman who represented, it was the physical embodiment of evil, Risha, and somehow, we don't know who's doing this, not the rabbis, not the prophet. He had a vision that they caught this physical embodiment, this woman who represents evil, they caught her, they trapped her in the box and they put the lid on. So we trapped the evil. What is it talking about? So the Gemara has a tradition that's referring to the fact that the Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, which was a body, the Knesset has 120 members, they're imitating the Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, was a body that consisted of 120 Rabbanim, not politicians, 120 Rabbanim, and amongst them Kam and Avim, several of them were prophets. And these Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, they were the ones who were instrumental in building the second Beit Midrash, Ezra and Nehemiah, all of their Chaverim. And they were mispalal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he should be mevatel Yetzer Hara b'Avodah Zarah, and their prayers were answered. And then they saw they get in places. They were mispalal to Rabban Shalom should be mevatel Yetzer Hara for arayis, the sex urge. So the Gemara says the hens didn't lay any eggs for 3 days. No one had any Yetzer Hara at all. The animals didn't have. So they realized that's not a good idea. They're not going to have any babies born. The whole world is going to come to it. So they prayed to Rabban Shalom, he should cross out that prayer. But because they did pray to Mevatel Yetzer Hara B'Arayis, so it helped a little bit that we only have the Yetzer Hara for Eshes Ish, for a married woman. We don't have the Yetzer Hara for other relatives. Okay. So the Gemara says that tefillah helped a little bit.